to my TED Talk. I'm Maya. It's really nice to meet you all. If you already know me, what's up? This is my first time making something like this. I am very excited about it. I hope that you're all ready to bear with me. It's going to be a chaotic ride. It's going to be a lot of fun. Today, I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us as a model for which I will be studying the way that I can use my relationship with The Last of Us, specifically the second game, to explain what I understand about my studies of affect for the sake of this essay, which is in fact for a class that I'm taking in university. Everyone say hi to my professor. He will be watching this. Disclaimer for my professor is, hey, what's up? How's it going, Andre? I really hope you're doing well. I'm gonna go over the time limit. I so hope that's okay. It's just gonna happen, and that is the bed that I've made, and I'm gonna lie in it, and I'm okay with it. Anyway, so to talk about the second Last of Us game, obviously I have to give you a summary of the first one.
Hi, this is Editing Maya. I'm watching this back and I hate the way that I explained the first game. So, I'm gonna actually just do it again here. I forgot to give a spoiler alert. This is a huge spoiler alert. I'm gonna talk about, many, 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 many spoilers. The game opens and you're playing as this little girl named Sarah, and she wakes up at night in an empty house and her dad is gone. Her dad's name is Joel. Joel is going to be one of the main protagonists for like both of the games. Sarah clocks the fact that her dad is gone because he is caught up in the start of the zombie apocalypse. She unfortunately does get killed off in the very beginning of the game. You gotta get the tragic backstory. And so the rest of the game is you playing as Joel years down the line when he has become a smuggler and he's hired to take this girl, Ellie, out of like the city boundaries. He finds out that she's actually immune to the zombie infection, and he's taking her to a hospital where they, in theory, can make a cure. The first game is this story of him grieving the loss of his daughter and kind of reckoning with the fact that he's in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, and then finding meaning again in this girl, Ellie, and she is the second protagonist of the game, and you play through their adventures as they kind of like get to know each other, and in the end, we find out that the cure actually can't be developed unless Ellie is killed. Joel makes the decision to slaughter everybody in the hospital. When he takes her out of the hospital, he lies to her and tells her that they weren't able to make a cure. And the second game kind of picks up from where he takes her, which is this commune where his brother lives. There's this woman that shows up, and we don't know who she is at the beginning of the second game. We find out that she's actually going to the commune where they live to kill Joel because her dad was the doctor that was supposed to operate on Ellie. So the second game is the story of Abby, this woman, killing Joel in cold blood, and Ellie reckoning with everything that comes after that.
The first game was like a huge success. People were really, really attached to it. So obviously, the second game was like very highly anticipated.
I'm gonna find and I'm gonna kill every last one of them.
This game was like very, very important to people, and that's what makes it a good example for this, because people cared about it a lot, and so it gives us a lens with which we can examine the way that people emote when they play games. There was even a lot of controversy around the second game, and I think that that even further proves that this game is a great example to use because people had that many expectations writing on it and were that disappointed. And that goes to show how important even just the first game was to people. The first game means more to some people, while the second game means more to others. Shout out William Hayes in my class. He likes the first game more, and that's his prerogative. I just peacefully disagree. Because The Last of Us is important to me, it becomes an example of the affect that is involved with me playing it. So a huge part of that for me is the story. It was the narrative, and it was the characters and the relationships that they form, and the just like ability that it has to depict like humanity and imperfection and like depth. And so that brings up this idea of how does narrative and story fit into games? Here I'm going to talk about, yes, I'm going to get my little brownie points for my class essay. So this is where I'm going to cite a couple of different theorists that have like worked within the video games industry and talk about the ways that they have kind of approached this subject and how I can use them to set up my explanation of affect and my relationship with affect in the game. And so the first guy I'm going to talk about is this guy named Thomas M. Malaby. In his work, Beyond Play, one of the things that he talks about is the early idea that our everyday lives operate based on rules that are separate from the rules that we engage with when we play. And so he's talking about this idea that play and work were separate, which has to do with this concept called the magic circle, which basically states that when we play a game, we're removing ourselves entirely from our contexts in the real world because when we play a game, we operate with a different set of rules. But this kind of falls apart because games aren't an activity to view, but they're an experience to engage in. With The Last of Us, I think this is mostly kind of shown through the way that, like, no matter how many times you play it, you're experiencing it differently. And that also has a lot to do with how we experience games emotionally, but also at the same time about how they respond to us. Malaby has a quote where he says, "Games are at root about disorder." This quote kind of talks about the way that games all have different cultural contexts and are separate socially, but the way that we choose to engage with them creates this relationship. What we do depends on the game, but the game also depends on us clicking the button to progress. The next guy I'm going to talk about is Gonzalo Frasca, and he wrote Simulation versus Narrative, Introduction to Ludology. He talked about how does playing a game affect us differently than a movie or a show would be able to affect us. This has a lot to do with the way that theory in game studies depends on the concept of games being an interactive experience, which touches on this idea that Malaby is saying, where games are able to kind of respond to us. So when you're reading a book, the conditions of it are set. No matter how many times you read the book, the same thing happens, the same words are on the page. When you're playing a game, it's different because the game is, in a way, also responding to you as you are responding to it. There's a quote by Frasca where he says, "Simulation is the form of the future. It does not deal with what happened or is happening, but with what may happen. Unlike narrative and drama, its essence lays on the basic assumption: change is possible." This is also huge in The Last of Us. The game depends on you in some way. There are expectations and there are stakes. Here's where I'm going to introduce Aubrey Annable. Aubrey, this is a message specifically to you. I need you to know that you're my sweet baby angel. She wrote a piece called Playing with Feelings. I would not have this video essay if it were not for her research. So she criticizes this and basically says it doesn't really account for the experience that the player is having. She's basically arguing that there is an innate response that you have when something that you don't know is going to happen happens. The way that we process that, feel about that, and then act on that, which is where affect comes into play.
You're gonna fucking die!
What's going on?
Let him go. Joel, please get up.
What is affect? Affect is entirely subjective. This is what we've been talking about earlier, where it is all different depending on context. Everybody has a different understanding of their own emotions because they all come from different places. It is a concept that encapsulates everything that is related to our emotional states, the way that we process them, what we think about them, how we act on them, everything. There's an animal quote. She says, "What we know is inextricably bound up with not only how we know it, but also how we feel about how and what we know." Because affect means something different to everybody, there is no one true definition. Which is really fun because I chose to do a research paper on something that can literally not be defined. Let's all just take a second, moment of silence for me and that choice that I made. This is also a huge theme in The Last of Us because we see this through the entire story. The whole theme of the story is humanity, and humanity is affect. What gives us our human qualities, quote unquote, what sets us apart from animals is our ability to combine cognitive thought and emotional processes and adapt to that. This is shown through The Last of Us very overtly. The whole plot is literally meant to be subjectively understood because the entire thing revolves around different perspectives.
I do okay.
Are you fucking kidding me?
You got a little mud on you there, sweetheart.
So do you.
Where?
Right there.
Sweet Jesus.
Doctor?
What are you doing in here?
You don't get to rush this.
When we learn why Abby did what she did, when we talk about her story, and arguably there are people that didn't connect with that, but that's okay, because that doesn't make this any less valid, because the entire premise of affect is that we are all affected by things differently because different things matter to us. This game can matter to me and not to you, and it can still also at the same time be a method with which we can study affect in games. I'm not arguing here that games are a superior form of media, but I am saying that because the way that we interact with them and understand them is different, we also have to study them under different pretenses. Affect theory is what gives structure and shape to the technological conditions of a game. There are parts of the game that emotionally affect us because of game mechanics. You don't want to press the square button when you're down there in the basement with Nora, but you have to get to the next part of the game.
Where's Abby? I'm not giving up, my friend.
By making the choice to engage with games, we are opening ourselves up to these new processes of affect, where we are forced to think about the way that we emotionally respond to things in an engaging way. By doing this, we can actually strengthen the way that we operate in a representational, physical, noticeable, explainable way, because those are the things that determine how we conduct ourselves. The best way for me to explain the affect of video games is for me to examine my own emotional relationship with games that are important to me, which is why The Last of Us is the game that I'm talking about. So here I'm going to talk about myself and talking about like some of the context that I have with video games and where I started playing video games and some of the things that I think might generate my own kind of subjective experiences. I watched the show Arcane, which was like a huge turning point in my relationship with video games because it opened up my eyes to a lot more of like the complex dimensions that exist within the video game industry. It made me want to find games that made me feel like that. And then The Last of Us came out, the show, which is actually how I was introduced to the game, was through the show. I watched the show and I fell in love with it. And then I played the game, and then I played the second game. And oh my god, like, I cannot articulate to you how I would wake up and the first thing that I would think about would be The Last of Us, and the last thing I would think about before going to sleep would also be The Last of Us. There are so many scenes that I can think of off the top of my head in this game that made me feel real, authentic emotion.
She's yours. If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I found here, I'm not found by myself. Welcome to Earth. Try sometimes you
Hey, old timer. Yeah, get a good scratch.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. Go back to bed. We'll talk about it in the morning, okay? I have to finish it. If it was me, I'd want you to do the surgery.
We did good back there.
Cut her down. She's one of them. Left.
Hi, Abby. We got a clear signal on you. Where in Santa Barbara you calling from?
2425 Constance. We got a tip about a base, but there's no one here. We're looking for fireflies. I'm a firefly. I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
To me, The Last of Us is important because it represents humanity and its absence. It shows these themes that prove that all people are capable of empathy and that everyone can grow and good and evil don't honestly exist and that the only thing that we have is this one life cycle and the choices that we make while we're a part of it. All of these things are all connected to the way that we feel. We all react to them differently. Some people fucking hate Abby to the point where they won't play the game. But then again, like, my experience is also subjective. I have things that make me different. We have like my sexuality and my gender and my introduction to the game and the knowledge that I had about the game prior to playing it, like my introduction to it through the show rather than as someone who played the first game before the show came out. My familial relationships and my friendships and how those frame the way that I understand relationships within narrative. On those grounds, like, I think it's important to acknowledge that I am not cis, nor am I straight. You know, I grew up from the perspective of being a woman, and I also like women, and that's a huge part of the way that I interact with this game. As a queer person, I really appreciate The Last of Us because it's not about being queer. It just has queer characters. The main character likes a woman, is a woman. There is a trans man in this game. They don't even really talk about it more than just like for a brief moment. And the way that they talk about it, it's not even about him being trans as much as it is about his relationship with his sister and his sister learning about it and responding to it, which again has to do with affect and the way that we respond to our world and the way that we can use games to mirror our ability to be more empathetic on a daily basis, our ability to understand people and sympathize with them as much as humanly possible. And I think that we should all strive to do that more. And Shaw has a great quote about this where she says that the solution to the invisibility of gender, race, and sexuality in gaming is not the creation of a plurality of video game markets, but instead an insistence on diversity in the construction of the market. So what she means here is that in creating games for the sake of being gay, being queer, being whatever, you actually further separate them from the mainstream gaming industries. You create them within a separate context. And so instead of making video game industries more inclusive, you're actually creating further divides. She goes on to say that rather than focus on gamers or marginalized groups, researchers must address how video games enter into people's everyday lives. Normalizing video games for all audiences, finding ways to emphasize their everydayness in contemporary media culture is a more productive approach to demands for representation. Normalizing games allows us to cultivate a new kind of relationship with them that lets us talk about things in a new way. And we see this with The Last of Us because its story is built so that the player can witness it in a subjective way, and it's meant to operate in that way. There are things that are ambiguous, and we're able to make a more concrete judgment on what the point of it being in the game is beyond, is it good, is it bad? Annabelle talks about Shaw's work regarding this, and her quote that she says is, "I am making the case for feeling disoriented, getting a bit lost and being unsure about one's position and what it permits, as a strategy of bringing into relief what we can see and say from a particular location, and also for reorienting game studies in ways that might permit other meanings, other games, and other histories to emerge." By disorienting ourselves with the game, we can affectively reorient assumptions that we make about relationships between, quote, time and space, fact and fiction, bodies and technology, and their relationships, end quote, in order to open up space for people to become more sensitized to external conditions like homophobia. This opening ourselves up to being more empathetic and understanding other people in a new way also pertains a lot to Abby's story and the way that even though she has strayed very far from a path where we would call her quote unquote good, she is still able to learn. She is still able to feel empathy for these two kids that she runs into in the forest and so on and so forth. By being unsure of yourself, you are more susceptible to being changed. Making the choice to play a game means actively making the choice to disorient your notion of the way that things should work, and a choice to engage with a productive kind of confusion that comes from the combination of video games and affect theory. The point of this whole video essay is that I want to emphasize the fact that games are able to make us think about the way that we act and feel in a new way and create new conversations, new ways of behaving and conducting ourselves in public. And the fact that I am making this video essay in the first place is proof that this is true, because it's this idea that when we're affected by something, we react to it. My reaction was making this video. The fact that I am here, sitting here, talking to you, is due to this game. I think as a species, we've shown that we are able to adapt to new media. Like when an apocalypse scale event happens, if it were to happen in the context of the real world, which is something that is becoming more and more scary, you have to start to think about things like clean water and transportation and communication and food distribution and food cultivation, and there's imported goods and travel restrictions and the fact that society becomes local instead of global, and there's literacy levels and education. The fact that I'm sitting here and I'm listing all of these things that are important to me, that I'm thinking about as I'm playing this game, shows that these are conversations that people are going to start to have if they're able to interact with games in this way more often. And I believe that based on the pattern of technology in the past, we as a society are going to adapt to this new technology because it is just what we do. We adapt, we evolve. And I'm just so thankful that The Last of Us is like a game that ended up being my gateway into this realm where there are such new and exciting things happening, and they're gonna keep happening, guys. And that's fucking awesome, and that's all I really had to say at the end of the day.